When we think of the most violent criminals in history, it is the image of a lone individual which is often conjured, a misanthrope whose evil mind hungers for the kill. But this same passion for death can burn twice as brightly when shared between corrupted lovers. A horrific pact which takes the often nurturing and benign feelings of companionship and warps them into the deadliest of intentions. A perfect storm, a psychopathic killer with dealings in the occult, meets a partner obsessed with romance, and she turns to fulfilling each of her lover's dark desires. The Lonely Hearts Killers were a match made in hell. Between 1947 and 1949, it is alleged that they killed at least 20 women, with more assumed victims. Both killers led tragic lives, but their evil actions cannot be excused. It began with Raymond Fernandez. Originating in Hawaii, Fernandez served in the Spanish Merchant Navy and with British intelligence service during the Second World War, but on returning to America, he was involved in an almost fatal accident. A steel hatch fractured his skull, causing severe injury to his frontal lobe, an area of the brain which is involved in intelligence, sexual desire, and decision-making. After being discharged from the hospital, he took to theft and was subsequently imprisoned for a short time. There, he shared a cell with an inmate who had a fascination with the black arts. Once released, Fernandez believed that he could use the occult powers he'd learned during his incarceration to exert influence on others, especially women. It was then that he met Martha Beck, who herself had experienced a difficult life. Martha claimed that she had been sexually assaulted by her brother when she was a child, but was then beaten by her own mother for the claim. After running away from home, Martha became an undertaker's assistant, perhaps developing a morbid curiosity with death at that time. Following a series of failed relationships which produced 2 children, Martha found herself unemployed in a dark and unstable world. To retreat from that world, she immersed herself in romantic films and literature. Falling in love with the idea of falling in love, Martha finally took out a Lonely Hearts ad in 1947, and Raymond Fernandez answered. He took to Martha and was happy that she was so committed to taking care of his every whim. That was when they began their cruel scheme to make money. They took out other Lonely Hearts columns with Fernandez as the piece of meat on display, the bait, if you will. He romanced the women who answered, eventually conning them out of money. But soon things turned sour. Martha hated the idea of Fernandez being with another woman, even if it was just a ruse. In 1949, she found one of the women, Janet Frey, lying in Fernandez's bed. Blinded by a fit of rage, she bludgeoned Janet with a hammer. Fernandez then finished the job by strangling her to death. So began the killings. Moving to Michigan, the predatory couple took up residence with a young woman, Delphine Downing, and her 2-year-old daughter. One night, Delphine grew agitated, so Martha Beck gave her some sleeping pills. Seeing her mother become drowsy, Downing's daughter began to cry. In another fit of rage, Martha strangled the child. Believing that Delphine would see the bruises on her child's neck, the murderous pair decided to tie up any loose ends. Fernandez shot Delphine in the head. Days later, after enduring Downing's daughter's constant crying, Martha drowned the little girl in a bath. When the couple were finally caught, they denied having murdered an additional 17 people the police were suspicious about. Regardless, both Martha and Raymond were sentenced to death. Martha's final words make a chilling epitaph and were as follows: "My story is a love story, but only those tortured by love can know what I mean. I am not unfeeling, stupid, or moronic. I am a woman who had a great love and always will have it. Imprisonment in the death house has only strengthened my feeling for Raymond." Perhaps two of the most twisted killers of all time, Fred and Rosemary West left a trail of bodies in their wake in the United Kingdom, some of them even their own children. It was a crime which shocked the United Kingdom, a tale of incest, torture, rape, and murder, accounts which were almost too bloody to believe, but the facts are unwavering. Fred and Rosemary West were twisted beyond measure. Fred West was born on September 29, 1941. The darkness which consumed his life was present from an early age. He claimed that his father sexually abused his sisters and taught Fred how to have sex with animals. Some researchers also suggest that Fred was molested by his own mother from a young age. West himself claimed that he had an incestuous relationship with one of his sisters and impregnated her, but these claims have never been verified. Leaving school at 15, West, almost completely illiterate at the time, took up a number of physically demanding jobs on a farm. Soon after, he was involved in a motorcycle accident. It took him a week to come out of a coma, and he had a metal plate implanted in his head for the rest of his life as a result of the crash. It wasn't long until he had another serious head injury when he fell down a flight of stairs. He tried to molest a girl and was pushed away during a struggle which resulted in the accident. This was only the beginning of his twisted obsession with young girls. He was involved in a number of crimes at that time, including molesting a 13-year-old girl. Avoiding a lengthy sentence, he then married a woman named Catherine Costello and moved to Scotland with her and her child, Charmaine. There they had their own daughter, Anne-Marie. Tragedy then raised its head as Fred ran over and killed a 4-year-old boy in an alleged accident during his work as an ice cream truck driver. The family moved back to England in the aftermath, where West had an affair with a woman named Anna McFall, who was a friend of his wife's. When McFall fell pregnant with West's child, she asked him to leave his wife. In response, West killed McFall, dismembered her body, and buried her. Because McFall was not a local, no one came looking for her. Eventually, Catherine Costello divorced West and left without taking her children. It wasn't long before Fred met Rosemary Letts while working as a bakery driver. Perhaps it didn't occur to Fred at the time, but he had just begun a relationship with a woman as twisted and murderous as himself. Rosemary's background makes for grim viewing. While pregnant with Rosemary, her mother was treated for depression with electroshock therapy. As a child, she was then ritually abused by her father and may have reciprocated this abuse on a younger brother. Rosemary's father forbid her from seeing boys her own age, so she took an interest in older men, one of whom raped her. When she finally met Fred West as an adult, he was 12 years her senior. Eventually, Rosemary and Fred married. They had a child together, with Fred's 2 daughters from his previous relationship staying with them. It was here that Rosemary's aggressive behavior became apparent. Resenting taking care of Fred's other children, she treated them harshly and with contempt. In a rage-fueled tirade, while Fred was out, she snapped and killed Charmaine, Fred's adopted daughter. When West returned home, Rosemary told him what had happened. Instead of going to the police, Fred confided in Rosemary that he too had killed before. He then disposed of Charmaine's body under the kitchen floor and agreed to cover up the murder. Not long after, Fred's first wife, Catherine, came looking for her now deceased daughter. Catherine, too, was murdered, although Fred and Rosemary never admitted to the crime even years later. Many suspect Fred was responsible, as Catherine's fingers and toes were missing, something West did to his other victims. Fred encouraged Rosemary to have intimate relationships with other men, including her own father, sometimes for money, sometimes not. Around this time, Rosemary gave birth to another daughter, Mae West. They then moved to their infamous house of torture and murder, 25 Cromwell Street, where Rosemary gave birth to a further 7 children, some of them Fred's, others the product of her relationships with her clients. Throughout the following years, both Rosemary and Fred were involved in at least 8 more brutal murders, all young women who they brought into their home. Fred also began abusing his own daughters and even strangled one of them to death to silence her from telling people about her abusers. When the Wests were finally caught after one of their daughters had confided in a friend about the abuse, the police discovered the bodies of their victims buried throughout their home. It is suspected, however, that there may be other bodies, but Fred West took their names and locations with him to the grave. He committed suicide while in custody and was found hanging in his cell. Rosemary West is still in prison in the UK and will never be released despite claiming to be innocent. Their surviving children still fight to escape the twisted shadow cast by their vicious parents. Two sadistic killers of the utmost depravity. That was how a judge described Ian Brady and Myra Hindley. They committed a series of horrific child murders between 1963 and 1965, and their crimes are still infamous to this day. Born in Glasgow, Scotland, Ian Brady was abandoned by his single mother and brought up by another family in her stead. As a teenager, he was caught committing petty crimes, but nothing that predicted the evil of his later acts. A man of above-average intelligence, Ian was seen as punctual, well-mannered for the most part, but short-tempered. He also enjoyed solo pursuits such as reading and increasing his knowledge. A favorite topic of Brady's was the Nazi atrocities during the Second World War, a subject that would bring him close to Myra Hindley, his partner in crime. She too enjoyed the accounts of Nazi crimes. Myra herself was born into poverty as a child, and when her parents could no longer afford to keep her after the arrival of their second child, she was sent to live with her grandparents nearby. Hindley's father was a veteran and believed that she should be tough to the outside world. When she was just 8 years old, he even threatened to beat her if she did not retaliate against anyone who pushed her around. When she met Ian Brady at the age of 18, she was enthralled. They talked for hours about the murderous plots of the Nazis, fascinated with their vicious intricacies. Brady took an interest in photography and made his own darkroom, taking lurid photos of Myra. This was her break from the shy girl of her past, and she seemed to like it. As they opened up to each other about their deepest fantasies, Ian Brady told Myra that he would like to commit the perfect murder, a crime for which they would never be caught. And so they plotted and schemed, and soon they were ready to kill for the first time. Just before the murder took place, Brady had told Myra that he was ready to commit the murder. She drove around in her van at 8 p.m. looking for a victim, while Ian followed behind on his motorcycle. He signaled to Myra when he saw 16-year-old Pauline Reed, a friend of Myra's sister, walking alone along an empty street. Myra pulled up, offering Pauline a lift home. Once in the van, she asked Pauline if she wouldn't mind helping her find an expensive glove that she had lost out in the moors, a large area of countryside nearby. As Pauline wasn't in a rush, she said fine, and so they drove there. Once out on the bleak moors, Brady arrived and was introduced to Pauline as Myra's boyfriend, just there to lend a helping hand. According to Myra, Ian took Pauline out of sight for 30 minutes. When he came back, he led her to Pauline. She was lying on the ground with her throat slit, her clothes ruffled. Myra claims she knew that Brady must have sexually assaulted her before the kill. Brady, on the other hand, gives a different account. He stated that Myra was there for the sexual assault and murder, and that she assisted in both. On the way home, the murderous couple saw Pauline Reed's mother and brother out looking for her, wondering why she had never returned. Later that year, the couple struck again. This time they enticed a 12-year-old boy called John Kilbride into their car with the promise of alcohol. Then they drove, this time with the boy, to the moors once again. Brady disappeared with the child, sexually assaulted him, and strangled him to death. But the killers were not done. They kidnapped 12-year-old Keith Bennett, who befell the same fate. On the 26th of December 1964, they targeted a young girl, Leslie Ann Downey, who was standing on her own at a fairground. Saying they needed her help to carry some parcels to their car and then home, they took her to a house where she was raped and killed. Her naked body was then dumped out in the moors. Both Myra and Brady accused each other of being the murderer after the fact. Their final victim was 17-year-old Edward Evans. They asked him back to Brady's home. There, Brady murdered Edwards with an axe and a piece of electrical cord. But Brady had made a fatal mistake. He committed the murder in front of David Smith, Myra's brother-in-law. It seems that Brady believed he had influence over the younger Smith, but although Smith agreed to help Brady dispose of the body the next day, instead, he went to the police. After further investigation, the police found an audio tape of Leslie Ann Downey pleading for her life for 13 minutes. Brady kept this as a perverse souvenir. Myra Hindley died in prison in 2002 of cancer. Ian Brady lived until May 2017, when he finally passed away at the age of 79. He had stated all along that he just wanted to die rather than being forced to rot in prison. That was a plea for mercy, but mercy was the one thing he did not show to his victims. That's all for now. Remember, you may not believe it, but